Audiophiles love a good debate. Tubes versus solid state, digital versus vinyl, cables that definitely make a difference versus those that absolutely don't. But one of the longest running arguments is this: should I buy bookshelf speakers or floor standers? Which really provides the better listening experience? If you have the answer, please tell us in the comments below, and hit that like and subscribe button while you're down there. On paper, the debate about bookshelf speakers versus floor standers looks simple enough. Bigger has to be better, right? More drivers, bigger cabinets, deeper bass, more scale. But after years of stuffing everything from huge Altec Lansings to modest Merlins into my stubbornly square listening room, I've come to realize that it's not that straightforward. Sometimes big just doesn't work, for reasons I'll get into later. So let me set the scene. My room is almost square, which in acoustic terms is a bit of a cruel joke. Anyone who's dealt with a room like this knows the problems. Bass. Poor boomy bass. No matter how exotic the gear, the room just sits there plotting ways to turn clean bass into a thick boomy soup. And it doesn't have to be square room proportions that mess you up. L-shaped rooms that open up into different parts of the house, hardwood floors, large glass panels, it's all problematic when you're trying to pick and choose a speaker system. I've tried all the usual fixes and some pretty unusual ones. I've lined the walls with GIK acoustic panels, built my own bass traps, put up quadratic diffusers that weigh 100 pounds a panel. I've measured and remeasured, dragging speakers forward, sideways, back again, with laser measures and tape rules. I've also rotated in and out an embarrassingly long list of speakers: Martin Logan's, ProAc, Sonus Faber, Audio Physics, Clipshawn's quads, spatial audio open baffles. Each one taught me something new, but none of them could rewrite the laws of room acoustics. Floor standers have some real limitations. Plenty of people swear by them. Paul McGowan of PS Audio has even said a speaker can never be too big for a room. But with traditional single box floor standers, I've found the story is different. The problem is that a floor stander ties everything together in one fixed location. The mids and highs want to be away from walls so they can breathe and let the speakers create depth and image properly, while the bass often needs reinforcement from boundaries or placement where it can cancel out nulls. But with everything coming from a box in one location, the sound is always compromised. When the energy is coming from one cabinet in one location in the room, you can't optimize both ends of the frequency range. You have to find a happy medium, a compromise. The compromise is inherent, it's built in, and you just have to live with it. That's why stand mounts can make more sense. By rolling off at 40 or 50 hertz, they dodge the worst of the room's low frequency chaos. You can place them where mids and highs really flourish, usually well out into the room, and then you hand off the low end to subwoofers that you can position independently. I've experimented with everything from a single rel carbon special to a full distributed bass array, often termed a swarm. That meant 4 passive subs, each powered by studio amps and managed through a mini DSP, spread around the room in non-symmetrical spots. The swarm works because of how it excites the room. With only 1 or 2 subs, you're at the mercy of standing waves. Spots where bass piles up into a boomy mess or cancels out completely. Move 1 foot to the left and it's overwhelming. Move 1 foot to the right and it disappears. With the swarm, each sub excites the room differently. The peaks from one overlap with the dips from another, so the problems average out. Instead of wild swings of too much or too little bass, you get a smooth response across the room. That said, I've also found that a single well-placed sub can deliver most of the performance of a swarm system without the extra complexity and cost. Now, one of the common criticisms of stand mounts is that they sound small compared to floor standers, that they can't pressurize a room or create a big enough stage. That's largely untrue. Think about it If you strip the bass section out, the mid-range and tweeter drivers look very similar to what you'd find in a good stand mount. Add subs to the equation, and the total air moving ability often matches or exceeds that of a tower speaker. I've heard compact speakers like the Acora SRB fill a large room with effortless sound and at high volume. With subs, they deliver scale, impact and finesse on par with much bigger designs. Yes, if you want that chest-thumping sensation of giant speakers at full tilt, stand mounts may never fully replicate it. But for most people, especially those in tough rooms, the difference is negligible and an acceptable trade-off. And then there's the visual perspective to think about. Floor standers look impressive. They dominate the room. They scream, serious system. Stand mounts, on the other hand, look modest, even apologetic, until you hear them. Set up properly, you wonder why you ever tolerated the boom and the compromises of those big boxes. For me, I'm done struggling with big speakers in an 18 feet by 18 feet room. While there's ample physical space for a larger speaker, the acoustic space just isn't ideal. So I finally sold my ProAct D40Rs, which were constantly battling the room, and moved to a smaller speaker with a sub. And the bass problems disappeared, with very little in the way of a trade-off. In any case, the choice of stand mount or bookshelf speakers isn't really the main issue. It's dealing with the room. A poor room will humble any speaker, tower or bookshelf. A well-managed room with acoustic treatments and thoughtful integration of subs can make stand mounts outperform towers, especially in spaces with tricky acoustics. Of course, floor standers still have their place. In a large, well-proportioned room, they can give you glorious full-range sound in one package. But in real-world homes, with real-world problems, stand mounts plus subs are often the smarter choice. What matters is how well you can get your speakers and your room to work together. Of course, there are other angles I haven't touched here. Dipoles, horns, open baffles. They all interact differently with the room. But as a general rule of thumb, if your room is giving you headaches, think about stand mounts with subs before you spend your hard-earned cash on big floor standers.